Welcome to Sola Church Online.
I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and together we lead Sola Church, a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California.
We meet in person and online on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific. Our in-person service is held indoors at Joslyn Park Auditorium, which is at 633 Kensington Road.
And our pre-recorded online service can be found on our website, solachurch.life, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. That's at Sola Church LA.
And we have a great service for you today. Let's worship.
Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your perfect love is casting out fear. caught in the middle of the storms of this life. I won't turn back, I know you are near, and I will fear no evil, for my God is with me, and if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go from every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. A glorious light beyond all compare. And there will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, we'll live to know you here on the earth, and I will fear no evil, for my God is with me. And if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go from every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go from every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Yes, I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. There will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, still I will praise you, still I will praise you. Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Lord, you never let go.
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out today, please don't feel obligated to give. But if Sola Church is your church home, or these online services have been a blessing to you, it's super easy to make a one-time tax-deductible donation, or even to schedule a recurring gift.
The easiest way is to scan the QR code on your screen, but you can always go to solachurch.life, click the tab at the top that says Give.
In our message today, we're going to talk a little bit about giving to one another when we're hurting, and so very specific context. But man, giving is such a blessing,
It is.
right? Like the Bible says, it's better to
Yes.
give than to receive. And I think sometimes in our lives we forget just how good it feels to practice generosity. And so anyway, this part of the service is a special part of the service.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
All right, so let's set the stage. Rebels.
led by David's son Absalom, are closing in on Jerusalem. And David is running for his life. But this didn't just start, like it actually started years before with David's sexual misconduct, if not sexual abuse, with Bathsheba, and with his conspiracy to commit the murder of her husband Uriah. Those things started a chain reaction. As a result, David's baby died. David's daughter was raped. David's son was murdered. And now David is facing a coup d'etat from the murderer, his son Absalom. And David, as he flees Jerusalem, is heartbroken and he's hurting. Are you? Or is someone you know? I mean, we can all relate to struggling with pain, with loss, with loneliness. And one of the things that we want to focus on today is how we can be a source of comfort, healing, and hope to those who are hurting. So let's go ahead and open the Bible to 2 Samuel chapter 15. We're going to cover lots of ground today, not reading every verse. And so we're going to call this one Helping Those Who Hurt. I want to talk about a number of ways that we can do that. The first is this, being there. Yeah, just being there. So look with me at 2 Samuel 15, beginning in verse 13. We're backing up just a couple of verses from where we left off last week. Now, a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom, David's son, the one who'd murdered his brother Amnon for raping his sister Tamar. So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, we are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands. Then the king went out with all his household after him. But the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. Remember, David had multiple wives and concubines, so he leaves 10 concubines behind. And the king went out with all the people after him and stopped at the outskirts. Then all his servants passed before him, all the Cherethites, all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites. 600 men who had followed him from Gath passed before the king. Then the king said to Ittai, the Gittite, why are you also going with us? Return and remain with the king. For you are a foreigner and also an exile from your own place. In fact, you came only yesterday. Should I make you wander up and down with us today, since I go, I know not where? Return and take your brethren back. Mercy and truth be with you. But Ittai, who again had only been there for a day and who was being encouraged to just stay behind and go with the flow, he answered the king and said, as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, surely in whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant will be. So David said to Ittai, go and cross over. In other words, come on then, let's go. Then Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the little ones who were with him crossed over, and all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness. So this is the first mention of Ittai. We'll talk more about him later. But you notice in verse 19 that he was a Gittite. That means that he was from Gath and Philistia. If you've been watching these online services throughout this series, you know a little bit of David's history with Gath and with Philistia. But long story short, David has gone from killing Philistines to converting them. It's so cool, and something to keep in mind that, life is full of surprises. And sometimes people that you thought were your friends will turn out to be your enemies. We'll talk more about that later. But other times, people who you thought were your enemies will turn out to be your friends. And that turns out to be, the case here. But notice what he says in verse 21 to David. Ittai says, in whatever place my lord the king shall be, even there also your servant will be. It's reminiscent of what we read in the book of Ruth. Like, if you've never read Ruth, you've got to read it. It's only 4 chapters, and it's an amazing story. But in the book of Ruth, Ruth says to Naomi, in a similar situation, different in many ways, but similar in many ways, She said, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. See how similar that is? Well, Ruth is David's grandmother. So when Ittai said these words to David, it had to really resonate with him. But Ittai's presence, Ittai's willingness to be there must have meant so much to David. I mean, those kind of things mean a lot, right? It means a lot when we wait with someone in the waiting room. It means a lot when we go with someone to court. It means a lot when we go with someone, as they attend a funeral. Sometimes we call this the ministry of presence, being physically present with someone in their time of need. I mean, it is more comforting sometimes than anything else, just having them with us. And it provides just an overwhelming sense of security and reassurance. And so all of this was wrapped up in how meaningful Ittai's decision to be there was to David. It's worth pointing out that, when it says in verse 23 that David crossed over the brook Kidron, well, 1,000 years later, the son of David, Jesus, would cross over the brook Kidron. It was the night that he would be arrested, and only hours before he would be crucified. And he led his disciples to a prayer garden. And of course, once he got to that prayer garden, he took 3 of the disciples, Peter, James, and John. We sometimes call them the inner circle. He took them with him deeper into the garden, where he then went a little farther still and prayed. But even Jesus just wanted them to be there. And so when people are hurting, one of the ways that we can, be a blessing to them is to just be there. It's all about being there, helping those who hurt, being there, but then also serving. Let's talk about that. Picking it up in verse 24, it says, there was Zadok also, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God. And Abiathar went up until all the people had finished crossing over from the city. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place, the tabernacle. But if he says thus, if God were to say, I have no delight in you, then David says, here I am. Let him do to me as seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. Therefore Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So rather than taking the priests and the ark with him, he tells them to return, and he's confident that if it's God's will, he'll be reunited to them and to the ark and to the tabernacle. You notice David's words, let him, that is, let God do to me as seems good to him. It almost kind of sounds like David is resigned to his fate, but I think there's more to it than that. I don't remember who it was who said this. It doesn't say in my notes, but my best guess is it was Warren Wiersbe. This sounds like something Warren Wiersbe would have written. But there are people who try to escape hurt. Sometimes we try to escape hurt. We just want to get out of this, whatever this is. And then there are people who don't necessarily try to escape it, but whose only goal is to endure it. Like that's when we're white knuckling our way through a particular season of life. But we're encouraged, rather than just trying to escape it, rather than just trying to endure it, we're encouraged to enlist it. Like enlisting it means going another step and saying, look, it's not just like, how can I get out of this, but what can I get out of this? Like, what is God wanting to teach me? What is God doing in my life? Who am I becoming as a result of these experiences? So I want you to notice something too, and this really goes to the point about serving people who are hurting as a way of helping them. What they wanted to do in verse 24 was like, start a chaplaincy program. Like, David, you're going to need some spiritual advisors. We should bring this sacred piece of furniture, and we should come with you. That's what they wanted, start a chaplaincy program. But that's not what David needed. What David needed was an intelligence community. He wanted to send them back to Jerusalem, where Absalom would likely, want to avail himself of the skills of a seer, and then they could provide intel
to David. So you see the difference between what they wanted. They meant well, and their idea wasn't a bad one, but the difference between what they wanted and what David actually needed. You know, this is an interesting thing that I've observed many times in my life, and I'll bet you've observed it too. And that is that, like, when somebody wants to do something for you, you know, not unlike the priests, they mean well, and they've got what is a good idea. It's not a bad idea, it's a good idea. But it's what they want and not what you need. If when you tell them no, if they get angry, then what you know is that it was never about you, it was always about them. That thing that they wanted to do for you, it wasn't really for you. It was for them, and they're mad because they're not going to get what they want. So, you know, if it was really about you, then even though you didn't go along with their idea, or even though you said no, they would be happy, because if it's really about you, that's what they care about. They care about what you need. And if that's not what you need, then they wouldn't want you to have that. You know, does that make sense? So when we're, you know, serving someone who's hurting as a way of helping them, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing not our wants, but their needs. And we need to not have our feelings hurt if what we want isn't what they need. It's got to be about them and not about us. So we help those who hurt by being there, by serving, but also a third thing, by empathizing. Look at verse 30. So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went up. Then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshipped God, there was Hushai, the Archite, coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. And David said to him, If you go on with me, then you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I was your father's servant previously, so I will now also be your servant, then you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel for me. And do you not have Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? Therefore it will be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall tell to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Indeed, they have there with them their two sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, went into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. And I want you to notice the two W letter words, wept in verse 30 and worshiped in verse 32. David wept and David worshiped. You know, we talk sometimes about how our hurts can make us bitter or they can make us better. If all we do is weep, they may make us bitter. But if we both weep and worship, because they're both legitimate, we do need to weep. We do need to feel our feelings. We do need to sit with that. But we also need to worship. If we weep and worship, then instead of getting bitter, we could actually get better. And worship isn't something that we do to escape from our hurts. Worship is all about bringing God into our hurts. You know, sometimes at a church service, you'll hear somebody say, you know, God, help us to leave this, that, and the other thing at the door as we come in. Well, you don't want to leave anything at the door as you come in, not even figuratively. You want to bring it in with you, because as we worship corporately, we're inviting God into it. And it's a reminder, too, of why, as we often say, you know, when you're hurting and when you feel least like going to church, that's probably when you need to go to church the most. I mean, don't forget, I mean, Jesus is present everywhere, but he did say that where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, you know, there am I also. So in some unique way, he manifests his presence when we gather together. And think about those places in the Bible, too, that talks about how God inhabits the praises of his people. Do not underestimate the power of a corporate worship gathering to impact and affect you when you are hurting, or even other people. But one of the things that we start to learn as we go along in life is that our hurts, those painful seasons, are actually entry points for God. And they can be entry points for the compassion of other people. You notice in verse 32, you know, when it talks about Hushai coming to David, it says that his robe was torn and that he had dust on his head. So those were signs of grieving. In other words, Hushai identified with David. He felt David's pain. It's not just that he sympathized with David. He didn't just feel sorry for him, but he empathized with him. Like he felt what David felt. He didn't even say a word. He didn't have to. It reminds me of that verse in Romans 12, verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Man, how we need to do that. That's a command to empathize, to enter into the feelings, both the highs and the lows of other people. And so when people are hurting, I mean, we can empathize with our words, certainly, but we can also empathize with active listening, like just hearing them out without judgment. Our body language is a part of this, making eye contact, our facial expressions, and even physical gestures like holding someone's hand or giving them a hug. There's that saying that people don't know how much they don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. And so this is about showing people how much we care for them, as we empathize with them, as we enter into their pain. But don't miss this reference to this guy Ahithophel in verse 31. Ahithophel was David's longtime friend. I was thinking this week, obviously, reading and rereading this story and preparing this message, just, you put yourself in the place of different people in the story. And in this particular case, I can identify with David. I mean, with the things that have happened in my life over the last 15 years, I feel like I went a whole lot of years with very few betrayals. And then in a short period of time, a whole bunch of betrayals. And one in particular that was really, really unsettling. I found out, without going into great detail, I found out that, someone who at that time was my best friend and who had really walked through everything that had happened to me, losing my marriage and my ministry and all of my material things, like he was my best friend in that season of my life. And then I find out that he's betrayed me, that he's stabbed me in the back, that he's been lying to me, that he's been living a lie. I learned this whole ugly thing in the period of about 24 hours. I heard about it from several different people, many of whom didn't even know each other, and none of whom knew that others were reaching out to me. Like it was a moment where God clearly exposed this whole thing. And I mean, I got to be honest, man, it was a gut punch. I felt pretty distraught, just keeping it real. I think more than at any other time in my life, I felt like, who can I trust? Like, is there anybody that I can trust? Or am I just like completely alone in this world? Now, I know that wasn't the truth. And I very quickly started thinking, I just immediately found comfort in knowing that there were people that I could trust. But again, I mean, just that immediate feeling though of, oh my gosh, like I can't trust anyone. It was really disorienting, really unsettling. I can relate to what David wrote about this. He did write about it in Psalm 55, beginning in verse 12. He said, "For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me who has exalted himself against me. Then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God in the throng." Later in that psalm, verses 20 and 21, this time I'm going to read from a different translation. I'm going to read from the Message. He says, "And this, my best friend, betrayed his best friends. His life betrayed his word. All my life I've been charmed by his speech, never dreaming he'd turn on me. His words, which were music to my ears, turned to daggers in my heart." Yeah. I bet some of you can relate to what David wrote, just like I can. Why would Ahithophel do such a thing to his longtime friend David? Well, at the very least, Ahithophel was an opportunist. At the very least, he surveyed the situation and decided that, the smart money was on Absalom. But it's possible, and I'm just throwing this out there for your consideration, it's possible that he was Bathsheba's grandfather. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because in chapter 23, verse 34, we learn that Ahithophel had a son named Eliam. And in chapter 11, verse 3, we learn that Bathsheba's father's name was Eliam. Was this the same Eliam? We can't be sure. But if it was, then Ahithophel was Bathsheba's grandfather. And if that's the case, then clearly he blamed David for what had happened and had held this against David, that David had ruined her life. Well, you could also say that Ahithophel is a type of Judas, just like Judas betrayed Jesus. Ahithophel betrayed David, and he's like Judas in more ways than one, as we'll see before we're through. So helping those who hurt, man, it's about being there, it's about serving, it's about empathizing. Number 4 of 5, it's about giving. If you'll jump to chapter 17, I'm going to kind of overview chapter 16 and 17 quickly, and then we're going to pick up some verses near the end of 17. So Absalom has come to Jerusalem. David's plan works perfectly. Ahithophel counsels Absalom to do a couple things. Number 1, he tells him to sleep with his father's concubines. Remember the 10 that were left behind? So they pitch a tent on top of the palace, and Absalom goes into this tent and is, with his father's concubines there as a way of, sort of planting his flag, so to speak. It's a way of asserting that, he now is the king. But also Ahithophel counsels Absalom to strike now. So a couple thoughts about that. The first part with the concubines was a fulfillment of Nathan's prophecy. Remember, Nathan had said that what David had done secretly would happen to him openly. So that did happen openly, right on the roof of the palace. In fact, likely the very spot from which David had first spotted Bathsheba. But Ahithophel's advice, strike now. Pursue David now. Kill him immediately. But Hushai, who remember is a double agent, Hushai is really working for David. Hushai gives the opposite advice. Hushai says, no, you should wait, and you should rally more troops from throughout Israel to ensure your success when you go against David and the small army that has gone with him. And really Hushai's plan was to buy David time to not just get, like across the Kidron Valley and over the Mount of Olives, but to cross the Jordan, putting the physical barrier of the Jordan River between them. And Absalom chose to follow the advice of Hushai. So verse 23, it says, chapter 17, verse 23, when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order and hanged himself and died. He was buried in his father's tomb. So, Ahithophel knew that Absalom would fail following Hushai's advice, that given enough time, David would find a way. And he didn't want to face David when David came back to Jerusalem. And so he took his own life, which is that other thing that I said is so much like Judas. Picking it up in verse 27, now it happened when David had come to Mahanaim, that Shobai, the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the people of Ammon, Maker, the son of Amiel from Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds and basins, earthen vessels, and wheat, barley, and flour, parched grain and beans, lentils and parched seeds, honey and curds, sheep and cheese of the herd for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So this is such a beautiful thing, this giving, this act of generosity. They weren't asked. They didn't have to be. And they didn't ask. They didn't have to. It's funny because all three of these guys, Shobai, Maker, and Barzillai, had reason to not want anything to do with this. Shobai could have said, well, I've been hurt. Shobai was an Ammonite. David had fought against the Ammonites. I've been hurt. I'm not going to do anything for David. Maker could have said, well, I paid my dues. Maker was the guy that housed Mephibosheth, the disabled grandson of Saul, for all those years before David, came to help him, to bless him. So Maker could have said, man, I've been there, done that. I've paid my dues. I've done enough good deeds for other people. And Barzillai could have said, I'm too old. We learned in chapter 19 that he was 80 years old. So he could have easily said, man, I've done all that. I've run my race. Like, this is my time to just take it easy. But in spite of all those things, they brought gifts. They shared what they had. They weren't looking for reasons not to do what they could. Instead, they were looking for opportunities to do what they could. Man, think about those times when we've been hurting and someone has done what they could, gifting us in some way, and what that meant. What a huge blessing that was. And so too, when we see people who are hurting and we have the ability to do something to help them, rather than looking for reasons not to, we need to look for opportunities to. Helping those who hurt. It's about being there, about serving, about empathizing, about giving, and finally, it's about telling the truth. Chapters 18 and 19. So first in verse 18, the battle follows. David divides his small army into 3 groups, one of which was led by Ittai, the guy that we talked about earlier. He'd only been there for like a day, but wasn't gonna stay behind, wanted to be a part of this. And so as David implements his strategy, he makes it very clear. He publicly announces that no one is to harm Absalom. But if you look at verse 9 in chapter 18, it says, then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth. So he was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. Remember that we learned before, Absalom only cut his hair once a year, and then the hair that was cut weighed like 5 pounds. So he was like the Fabio of the Old Testament, we joked. And as he's trying to get away from David's men on a mule, obviously I've skipped some verses. You can read more of the details of the battle on your own. But as he's trying to get away, his hair gets caught, in the tree. And the mule continues on. And so he's hanging there defenseless. And so it says in verse 14, starting partway into the verse, it says that Joab took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart. He did die immediately while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. Absalom did that. And so then the 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. So what a violent death. But this was in direct disobedience to what David had said. And so here we pick it up in verse 33 at the end of chapter 18. I'm going to start reading here, but read into verse chapter 19. Then the king was deeply moved. This is David finding out that his son is dead. The son who'd murdered his other son for raping his sister. The king who hadn't spoken to Absalom for 5 years after he'd murdered Amnon. The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. O Absalom, my son, my son." Well, then in chapter 19, Joab was told, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard it said that day, "The king is grieved for his son." And the people stole back into the city that day, as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. You see how this affected their morale. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, and that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now therefore arise, go out and speak comfort to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not one will stay with you this night. And that will be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now." Then the people arose and sat in the gate. The king arose and sat in the gate. And they told all the people, saying, "There is the king sitting in the gate." So all the people came before the king, for every one of Israel had fled to his tent. I mean, man, this was some pretty hard truth that Joab had to share with David. I'm sure David could have been like, "Man, with friends like you, who needs enemies," right? And there's more than one way to look at this. I mean, Joab probably felt that David's command to spare Absalom was a mistake, that it was an emotional thing, and that it was weak, and that it was not the right path of action. That probably, fueled Joab disobeying and killing Absalom. But now this, I mean, on David's part, it seems like this is really in some ways part of David's recovery. It's part of David, being done punishing Absalom and just wishing that this whole thing had gone differently and feeling conflicted and grieving, right? Like we can see what Joab is thinking and feeling, and we can see what David is thinking and feeling. But still, in this moment, when everyone had risked everything to save David and to preserve his monarchy, David's grief for his son was sending mixed messages to the people, and it was destroying their morale. And unknown to David, until Joab brought it to his attention, it was so serious that there was some political intrigue involved here. If David didn't address this immediately and fix this and make this right, even though Absalom was dead, he was still in danger of losing the monarchy. And so in that sense, Joab saves David's life and saves his kingdom. There are times when, even though someone is hurting, we still need to tell them the truth. And I'm not sure that Joab did this as well as he could have. I don't know. I don't know how I would have had this conversation with David. I don't even know if I read it right. Like, maybe I made Joab sound harsher than he did. Maybe I didn't make him sound as harsh as he was. I don't know. I don't necessarily think that Joab was the most sensitive guy in the world, just based on everything we know about him and all the things that he did. He was a pretty hard guy. But David did need to hear this. And so if we're gonna help hurting people in our lives, we've talked about all the good things that we can do for them, but another good thing that we could do that might be called for is at some point, in some way, to speak truth to them, to say something that may be hard to hear. Like, what happens if even though someone is hurting, but you need to have a conversation with them about their health, or you need to have a conversation with them about maybe self-destructive behaviors, ways that they're acting out in the midst of their hurt. Or what if there is bad news that you've got to deliver to them? Or what if there are relationship issues as a result of maybe kind of how they're handling the situation? What if there are even financial considerations, like serious financial discussions that need to be had? Like, you can't necessarily not have those conversations. Like, sometimes you have to have those conversations, and it's a true friend who's willing to do that. And it is yet another way that we can help those who are hurting, when we do it with love and with compassion and with the Holy Spirit's help. So helping those who hurt, being there, serving, empathizing, giving, telling the truth. Maybe you know someone who's hurting. As you're watching this online service, you're thinking of someone right now. Maybe you're watching it with that person. And maybe this week you can think about ways that you can do 1, 2, 3 of these 5 things to help them, to help the hurting person in your life. Maybe you're the one who's hurting, and maybe you need to be encouraged to let the people who know you best and love you most help you in these ways. Sometimes when we're hurting, sometimes we just want to keep everybody at arm's distance. I get that. I've been there. I've done that. But there at least needs to be some person or some small number of people that we let in. What if we did that? What if we began this week really making an effort to help those who are hurting? And what if we as a church were available to help those who are hurting? What if even our gatherings, granted, you're watching an online service, and maybe this thought is related a little bit more to our in-person service, but what if our worship gatherings were such that when people were hurting, they weren't less inclined to come, but more inclined to come? What if their first thought wasn't, I can't handle being there? What if their first thought was, I can't imagine not being there? Because I know that that's a place where I can hurt. I can be where I am, and people are going to love me, and people are going to accept me. They're not going to judge me, but they're going to rally around me. And it is going to feel good to receive that love and that care. Father, I pray that you would make us really mindful of the people around us who are hurting, and that you would inspire us, Lord, to find ways to help them now. And may Sola Church be a church that helps hurting people. For your glory, in Jesus' name, amen.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card.
Yeah, just go to our website, solachurch.life, and scroll to the bottom of the homepage. If you're watching for the first time, that's how you can let us know that you were here today. But also, if you've ever thought about joining us for one of our virtual small groups, that's where you can request the information.
And just a reminder, go and follow Sola Church on social media.
Yeah, for sure. Our handle is @SolaChurchLA, so we're on all your favorite apps.
And we hope that everyone has a great 4th of July, and we will see you next time at Sola Church Online.
Bye, everybody.